How we doing, folks? My name is Paraplegic Sloth. Hello and welcome along to episode 3 of our trade tutorial mini-series for Europa Universalis 4. And in today's episode we're going to be taking a fairly decent look at trade power, a few things in between, and then we'll finish up on something called trade propagation. So what is trade power? Trade power is the proportional representation of control or influence that a faction has over wealth within each node. So in other words, the higher your percentage trade power, the more of a say you have in what happens to the money within that trade node. So we've got two examples here. We've got the Gujarat on the right and we've got Hormuz on the left. Now, each trade node has a varying degree of trade power within it. And that's pretty well demonstrated here. So on the left hand side in the Hormuz node, we can see here the percentage, 98%. That's telling us that we have 98% of the trade power within that trade node. And then on the right, 94%. We have 94% of the trade power within that node. But if we look at the numbers just to the right of the percentage number, it just illustrates that within each trade node, the amount of trade power can vary substantially. So on the left here, looking at Hormuz, 342.8. That's the amount of trade power that we have in Hormuz. Now 342.8 is 98% of the trade power within that node. On the right, 1,357 is 94% of the Gujarat trade power. Okay, so that's important to understand because you'll start to see how powerful that can potentially be when we look at trade propagation at the end of the episode. So when we look at trade propagation, think back to this bit and how that becomes really relevant. So there are three ways that trade power is derived, where you get trade power from: provincial, trade ships, and merchants. So we'll look at provincial trade power first. It's the longest thing that we'll need to talk about. So each province in the game yields an individual amount of trade power. So if we click on the Barma province here, and then on the panel that pops up when we click on that province, in the bottom left hand corner, we'll see trade power 11.2. So the owner of this province is given 11.2 trade power in the Gujarat trade node, and then it stacks up with every other province in the trade node. Now, all provinces have different values, and if we come down here to this one with a portrait on, we'll see that the trade power in this province is 100.8. So that's almost 10 times more than the Barma province that we looked at just a second ago. So that just illustrates how much difference there can be between provinces. Now, you'll see that there are many of these provinces with portraits on, and this is the game's way of telling us that these provinces have a higher than normal value of trade power. So this kind of portrait here is a center of trade, and then there are kind of like natural portraits as well. So this one here is depicting an estuary. So estuaries yield between 5 and 10 trade power, 5 or 10 trade power. This particular one yields 10, the Indus estuary. If we just pop up to Alexandria, the estuaries in Alexandria give you 5 trade power bonus. There is one individual, I'll just point it out because it won't take too long. There is an individual province in the Lubeck trade node. This is the highest bonus, natural bonus in the game. So this one has a sound toll plus 20 modifier. That's the only one in the game. It's unique. Okay, next let's talk about trade ships. So, light ships during the game change with technology levels, but they all have a trade value. So at the moment, my technology level, it's diplomatic technology, gives me frigates, and frigates are worth 3.5 trade power per light ship. Now, the next time I tech up, I will unlock heavy frigates, and when I upgrade my frigates or I build new heavy frigates, then those will have more trade power. So just bear that in mind, that it's not fixed throughout the game. So you make a trade fleet. It can be as little as one or as many as you like, and the trade fleet will wield the additive trade power that it has, the cumulative trade power within the fleet. And you can send these fleets to nodes, and this is called protect trade. So the trade power only applies to a node that the ships are in protecting trade. Okay, so if you have them just docked up in a province that's in the Hormuz trade node, the ships don't give their trade power to that node. They have to be on this mission called protect trade. So you click on protect trade and it gives up all the nodes where you can send the fleet to. And if you hover over the send button, it'll give you kind of a rough guide of what you can expect to achieve if you send the trade fleet to that node. So if we send our trade fleet to the Crimea node, we'll get 12.88 profits. And if we send it to Aleppo, it's telling us 170. So obviously Aleppo is by far the more profitable option. Now, trade ships do require a monthly ducat maintenance. So just bear that in mind. They are not free. Once you've paid for them, you will continue to pay for them in the form of maintenance. And this number that you see here includes the deduction of the maintenance. So if we hover over Constantinople, it's telling us that if we actually send this trade fleet to our capital node, we'll actually lose 1.62 ducats a month, and that's because of the maintenance. And the last way that we can achieve a little bit of trade power is with merchants. So we use merchants as our primary way to interface with the trade network, but merchants are also actually worth a little bit of trade power themselves. And I do have a good example of the kinds of things that you can achieve with them. So if we head over to the Ragusa trade node. Now in Ragusa, let's just click on this and have a look. So in Ragusa, I own every single province in the trade node. And if we just look here, it'll prove that. So provincial trade power, I'm the only one with any, so I have all of it. So the total provincial trade power in Ragusa is 137.5, right? Now, despite that, I only control 25% of the trade power within the Ragusa node, which is ridiculous, right? But if we look over here on the pie chart, we can see that Denmark has got 9% of the trade power. And if we just examine what's going on here, we can see that the only thing that Denmark have in this trade node is a merchant. They don't have a trading fleet. All they have is a merchant on transfer trade. And the reason that Denmark have achieved 9% is because they actually have quite a high empire modifier to trade power, 53.2%. Now, we haven't spoken about modifiers yet and how that can have such a dramatic impact, but we'll talk about that in another episode. But just to show you that one merchant, although it only gives you a base trade 2 power, trade power, sorry, with this modifier, it can actually be boosted quite significantly. And Denmark now has 9% with owning nothing. And they are contributing towards 12.9 ducats a month being extracted from that node. So that pretty much wraps up where we were talking about where trade power comes from. So there's just one more thing we're going to talk about in this episode, and that is something called trade propagation. But before we talk about trade propagation, I just need everyone watching this to understand the difference between upstream trade and downstream trade. So if we look at Hormuz here, and we look at the trade routes, the trade route moving out from Hormuz into Basra, right? So Basra is downstream of the Hormuz trade node because the trade is flowing out of Hormuz into Basra. So Basra is downstream. If we look at the trade routes feeding into Hormuz, they come from Gujarat and the Gulf of Aden. So Gujarat and the Gulf of Aden are upstream of Hormuz. Now, it's important to understand that because trade propagation only applies upstream. So the trade propagation from Hormuz will apply to Gujarat and the Gulf of Aden, whereas the trade propagation from Basra will apply to Hormuz, so on and so forth. So if you have 10 trade power in a trade node, that's 10 trade power, not 10%, 20% of the provincial trade power that you have in that node is propagated upstream, right? So we're on Basra right now, and provincial trade power, there's a column for it, so you can very easily see what your provincial trade power is. And right now in Basra, our provincial trade power is 232.7. So 20% of that number, which is going to be like 46.5 or something, will be propagated into the Hormuz node. And let's show you what that looks like. So if we click on the Hormuz node and we go over to the total trade power here of our empire and just hover over that number, it's telling us right there, transfers from traders downstream. Now if you see that line there, transfers from traders downstream, that is the line that is telling you about propagated trade power. So transfers from traders downstream 46.5, which is 20% of the provincial trade power in the Basra node, which we just showed you. Now it's important to understand this because if we go back up to our example here in Ragusa, the reason why my control in Ragusa, as well as all the merchants there with the trade power bonuses that they've all got, I'm also getting horrendously messed up in this trade node by the propagated trade power, particularly from the Genoa trade node. So Ragusa is upstream from Genoa, right? Now let's talk about this dynamic a second. Now, the amount of trade power in Genoa is a lot. Now it's all owned by lots of different people, so it doesn't look like it's much, but it's a lot more than what the trade power in Ragusa is. So 20% of the provincial trade power in Genoa is being applied to Ragusa. Now because there's so much more trade power in Genoa, it's having such a profound effect on Ragusa, because Ragusa's got much less trade power. So 20% of the provincial trade power in Genoa is probably worth somewhere in the region of 50 to 75% of the trade power in Ragusa. So that's where trade propagation starts to become really powerful, and it also starts to show why these end nodes are so powerful, particularly Genoa and the English Channel. Although Venice is an end node, it's pretty shit. We might talk about that in another episode, but generally Genoa and the English Channel are the best end nodes in the game, and this is one of the reasons why, because the trade propagation from them can be a really powerful dynamic. And of course, if you're collecting in Genoa and you're getting propagated trade power upstream, just think of all the power that you have to funnel more money into your collection point, and that's the point of the propagated trade power. So that's where we're going to end the episode. Now, really need some feedback on what you guys think of this series so far, and whether or not it's worth me continuing the series. It's actually quite time consuming making these, so let's say 50 likes. If I get 50 likes for this video, then I'll take that as a sign to continue the episode, the series, and I'll make the next 2 or 3 episodes of the series. So 50 likes, and please consider subscribing as well. All the support I can get for this tiny little channel is greatly appreciated. Okay guys, thank you very much for watching. If you want to see more, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button. Take care guys, have a great day, and I'll see you hopefully in the next episode.